All right, so this is going to be our series post. So we're going to go through different series each week. Today we're going to go through a running series. So we're going to have a running series, an ACL series, a CrossFit series, a sports series, and a golf series, a golf-specific series. So we're going to have all these different series where we're going to go through different drills, exercises, different topics of interest within each one, and talk about some things to help improve you within those different areas. So today, Allison's going to be talking about running, specifically around the hip. So if you saw some of our posts earlier this week, they will be talking about some exercises that you can do for the hip. So without further ado, we'll have Allison go ahead and take over.
All right, so the three key points we want to talk about today with running and what your hip should be doing and what we look for is that we need optimal hip extension, optimal hip flexion, and also good hip external rotation strength to support positions. So when we run, so Pat, if you can turn that way.
It's like that guy up there.
Yes. Can you see our guy? Yeah, so we're going to try to get Pat in this position. So when you're here, if we're looking at this side, this is hip extension, all right? And we're looking for extension throughout this extremity and through the back. So if you don't have proper glute strength, if you don't have good trunk extension, it's going to be hard to get this hip into that extended position. So if you don't get into that extended position, here's what might happen. You might be landing with your knee bent, and so a lot of runners complain of knee pain or hip pain or something, and if you're here, you're putting force through this in a much different way than if you're here, okay? So if your glutes engaged, you're going to be able to put the force much better into the back of your hip versus kind of holding on your hip flexors when you're in that supporting position, okay? So
from that standpoint, from an exercise, if you wanted to work on that kind of isolated, what would you give like one basic exercise recommendation?
So one of the most simple things I would work on in the beginning, as a beginner, is just a bird dog. So if you are on your hands and knees, and you're just working on elongating your body, is just to be able to conquer this position. So if you can start to conquer this, if this is easy, then we can talk about going up. If that's a challenge, then we're going to work here anyway to get your basic stability.
Right, and there's a difference between doing this,
Totally.
right, and being able to hold that leg straight out.
So if you can see him, so do what you did the first time. So if you do this, you can see he's arching his back here versus come back down, hold yourself nice and tight here, and then kick back. And now he's getting much more extension from his hip versus from his back. And that's what we look for in that basic position. Okay. All right, so to couple with hip extension is hip flexion. So as the back leg gets into an extended position, the front leg's going to get into a flexed position. Okay? Yep, so if you have this leg in front, all right, so this is if you were stationary, but we know when we're running that we have one leg in the air. So go ahead and actually switch your feet around. Okay? And I want you to go off your left leg and drive your right leg forward for me. So as you're coming through as if you were going to run. Okay? Good. Now go ahead and go back.
Try that again.
Yep, so try that again. So come up, fall through. All right? So what you can see, I'm just going to have him go through this and come back. The higher he brings that right hip into flexion, actually the more extension he's going to get on the left. So they go together. Okay? Yeah. So it will kind of lengthen his stride out if it gets more hip flexion, gives you a lot more power, makes you a little faster as you get those going together. So that in itself is a nice little drill to do. But you can certainly refer back. We have some videos from earlier in the week that talk about hip flexion strength. And just working on improving your hip flexion strength at the end range is one way that might help you kind of be able to achieve that a little bit better.
Awesome. And then one last point for running for the hips.
Yep. Is to get, so hip external rotation is another thing we talk about. So external rotation, if your leg is straight, is turning that leg out like this. So that might not make total sense, but when your knee is bent, it's keeping that leg out this way. So if you start to look at different people and start to watch runners, you're going to see what Pat's doing right here. So a lot of times that knee is going on the inside of the hip and inside of the foot. And people might even say they hit their knees together sometimes when they run. And if that's happening, it's not really a knee problem. It could be a hip problem. So if we say externally rotate your hip, you'll see that that then points his knee forward, all right? So if you're noticing that your knees go in or you're seeing somebody else do it, you might complain even of hip pain or knee pain, but the hip control is the main reason here. So if we can get that knee to be out here by turning the hip out, so hip external rotation, then you're gonna get more proper force and better alignment through your leg to support your running stride and not hurt something.
Yeah, it just puts a lot more pressure at the inside of the knee, torque on the hip, and so if you're strengthening through there, it can help from a technique standpoint, help you be pain-free while you're running.
Totally.
Awesome.
So again, from an exercise standpoint, there's so many to do from there. Keep watching the posts. Anything that refers to hip external rotation is great. Earlier this week, we talked about a side plank with a clamshell, and that's one of the basic, it's not so basic.
Not so basic.
It's a little challenging, but it kind of incorporates the core stability into the hip control and starts to get you thinking, your body thinking about getting those external rotators turned on for that.
And building on top of the core strength that you need to run in general as well. So it's not just that isolated one, which they do have their place to do isolated hip external rotation, but the one that Allison just mentioned, that side plank into a clamshell, kind of builds on some of the core strength and stability that you need there. So cool.
Yeah.
So hip flexion with hip extension, they both kind of go together. We talked about those two, and then hip external rotation are three big key points to consider when you are kind of talking about doing an accessory program or strengthening or all that stuff if you are a runner of some kind, or if you're probably having some kind of pain, low back, hip, knee, could be coming from the hip around there. Right?
Definitely.
Cool.
And hip stability for sure.
And hip stability.
Yeah.
So that was our first episode for our running series. You'll see this kind of monthly. We'll go through different topics with running. It might be kind of how we did it today, injury and movement and exercise based. It might be going over some facts about running, a bunch of different stuff, but we will be doing that regularly. So we hope you enjoyed it. If you did, leave us a comment below.